course, the golden years of footy. 10 clubs, 27 years, the golden age of the SANFL. Baz, now our next guest, of course, Ben Porter spent a large portion of his life putting this together.
Yep.
Been good enough to fit us into his busy schedule. The author of The Golden Years of Footy. Ben, how are you, mate?
Phil, how are you, buddy?
Very well.
Barry,
Just,
how are you?
mate, let's talk about your career first that leads to this, because you can't have a footy career with, well, you probably could, but he's a Hills man. So as a young fella, mate, you're playing in the frost, freezing cold. I'm not imagining that's a great way to journey into footy.
No, look, it was showed that we really were keen, didn't it? I mean, playing up for Belair Primary School up in the hills against Heathfield and these sort of guys. And as I said on the back of the book there, we sort of dreamt of, you know, becoming big stars on the big stage, and that's what the SANFL was. It was the only game in town back in those days. So, yeah, played all my school footy at Belair and then went to Unley High and then played a bit of footy at Sturt in the under-19s, and obviously along the way you're meeting people and you know, creating friends, and then played a lot of amateur footy, Morphy Parks, and then got into coaching, and then again the coaching is probably what enabled me to, you know, have so many contacts and so many people to reach out to and get involved with the book with me. Yeah.
Wow.
Hey Ben, you know, you pick up this book and you go 400 pages. Most people pick up a book in a store and go, "Gee, it's a pretty good book, 400. Wouldn't take too long to put that together." But there's over 1,000 photos in here, so a bloke like Greg Anderson would be able to look at it and make something out of it. Yeah, he's in it. He doesn't have to read it, so he can look at the photo. So it's the perfect book for Ando. But when you talk about 400 players being profiled, the information is enormous. How long from start to finish to put it together?
Well, the actual book, I woke up in the middle of the night and had a bit of an epiphany and said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to write a book. And that was 6.5 years ago. But the reality is you could say the book's probably 45 years in the making, you know, because young Ben Porter kept all these footy budgets and was completely obsessed with it all, you know, and just loved the players and knew all the players, knew all the reserves players. And so I kept all my budgets and, you know, looked after them religiously, and then found myself, as I said, through my footy career, meeting some great guys, you know, guys like David Earl and David Tiller and these sorts of people, and then yeah, it just sort of came to. I thought, well, I'll write a book, and that's something I can do and contribute that way. Yeah.
What an unbelievable period it was. We're talking here 64.
64.
There, to what 90?
1990. Yeah.
What an unbelievable. I was thinking about it the other day when I thought we've got you coming in. I thought, wow. Memories there. I know that I can say that I went and saw Port win 8 flags in that period and whatever, but some of the rivalries in that period, Glenelg, North Adelaide in the 80s and whatever, you know, you can go back to the bloodbath games and the Port Sturt in those 60s and whatever.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Amazing football and some amazing players, which would obviously feature there.
And look, the clubs, I mean, Norwood, Glenelg, Sturt, Port, they were all very, very strong, and they all had a little bit of a go at it, but no one was really able. I mean, Port Adelaide obviously had some strong periods, but it was very tight, you know, who was going to win the flag. I mean, North Adelaide had a couple of goes there as well, but yes, it was a fierce competition, and I think that's what really resonates with people, is just how fierce those suburban crosstown rivals were. So
because when you go back, you know, in today's society, you can go to YouTube and pick up a game and whatever, and you pick up one of those old SANFL games, say at Glenelg and playing North Adelaide or something like that at the Bay. Mate, you know, physically unbelievable games of football.
Absolutely.
And really, there wasn't much biffo, really. A lot of people say there's a heap of biffo, but there wasn't enough. There was enough to keep everybody happy.
Absolutely, keep everybody entertained. And
right.
You know, there's a section in the book called Heroes, Villains, and Out of the Box, and I think that's a really, you know, a good part of the book, because we talk about the guys like Rick Davies, who, as a North supporter, you love to hate, but the guy was a seriously good footballer and
one of the best.
One of the best, and I actually name him as my state captain, so that's
no problem with that.
Controversial. Yep. But you know, we went to see these people because they weren't just great footballers, they're great entertainers and great characters. And, you know, Andrew Jarman was one of those, Tim Ginniver's another one, Grenville Dittrich was one of those, and it was just pure entertainment. You know, you'd go there all day, you'd go and watch the reserves, or certainly the second half of the reserves, spend all day there, and then you'd go back into the clubhouse and, you know, rub shoulders with some of these blokes. And I think maybe some of that's been lost a little bit in the modern game. We don't have access to the players anymore, and you know, as a young person, you were so immersed in it, you know, and I think that's what's resonating with the people who are enjoying my book.
That's a really good point about rubbing shoulders with the players, and you don't see too much of that anymore. At Port Adelaide, and I'm only saying because I'm a Port man, I used to work there and whatever, I still do. But the players, win, lose or draw, had to come back into the club.
Yep.
If they lost, they would come back through the bar downstairs and then upstairs.
Quickly.
So, because they'd have to go through the supporters to get up there, and that was a given. There was no, I'm going to sneak around here and come up. No way. You go in there, mate, and the supporters would let you know how you played and how the team went. So that is missing now. There's no rubbing shoulders with the players, although Port still do an after-match presentations to whatever, but there's not that. Yes, you know that.
That's right. It's not as intimate as it used to be, and I think that's a great shame. You know, and but you know, times move on, and hopefully this book sort of can reconnect some people with those great days.
Well, it's a great era, mate. Fantastic era.
Man, you started in '64 because 2 new clubs come in 1964. Is that why you picked '64 as your starting point?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you sort of get a bit of a grip on what you're going to write about, you need a bit of a start point and an end point, and obviously '64 creates that great starting point because Centrals and Woodville do come into the competition, and then you move to 1990 with the cataclysmic events of the Crows and the Port Adelaide sort of saga, and that gives you a nice start and end point, and then you can really focus on who you want to talk about, and again it coincides with the football that I grew up with, and it coincides with the people I've met, and again, I'm involved with my coaching and my playing a little bit, and a lot of those guys who I've met through amateur football are all in there. So
But sometimes when you start off a book, you kind of start with an idea of who, we talk about the Russell Weavers, the Barry Roberts, those kind of players. But then there's a couple of players you unearth that you go, wow, these guys are great stories. Was there a couple that
absolutely grabbed you? And I think a lot of it was about that because obviously Ebert and Robran and Neil Curley and these guys are icons of South Australian history and great Australian people, but they're not the only ones that we should recognise. I mean, as a young fella trying to play league football, I wasn't quite good enough, and therefore that's always sort of stuck with me that how good these blokes were. And you meet guys. Dennis Simons was a Dower back pocket for West Torrens, played 49 games. He's in the book. Trevor and Colin McDonald from Woodville, who I became mates with playing at Morphy Parks, they're in the book. Lenny Warren. Lenny Warren only played 30 league games, but he played in two premierships for Port Adelaide, and he was absolutely chuffed to be involved. And I took the book out and showed him in front of his mates at the post office the other day, and he was a celebrity again, And I think that's the glint in the people's eyes. I'll never forget. I want to name drop here, but Neville Roberts was one of the first blokes I interviewed, and Neville and I spoke for 2 hours. I couldn't get him to be quiet. He just kept on regurgitating, and the look in his eye made me realise I was onto something. Because he knew what it meant.
But the other big part in that era with the crowds, the 40,000, 50,000. I saw a really good crowd at Adelaide Oval just recently. Norwood winning the grand final against North by 27,500. But when you talk about the 40s and 50s, they're packed in. It's a 40 or 50 that'd be close to an 80 or a 90,000 crowd. So it'd be really interesting, I'd imagine, for those fans that go back and go, I was at that game. You've talked about it. I was at that game. So it stirs up a lot of great memories, doesn't it?
It does. And I interviewed Jimmy Derrington, and he said in his debut match at the Unley Oval, there was 15,000 people. And he said he couldn't hear because it was so loud, because it was pretty tightly packed in, and you're very close to the action as supporters in those days.
26,000 at Alberton for Port Norwood.
Yeah.
Now, if you went to Alberton,
where
are you going to fit 26
up on the roof and the stands, mate. They're in the trees, hanging off the walls.
But that was a norm.
That
was back then. The big games, no matter where they played, suburban grounds or Adelaide, bang, a mob would be there. You'd have to get there. Well, a lot of people did what you did. Watch the reserves till half time. In the car, boom, off you go.
You notice that these days when you go to the grounds, you don't have to park so far away anymore. Back in those days, it was a 25-minute walk from the car to get to the Prospect Oval.
Or don't take the car.
That's right. They were jam-packed, and that just added to the atmosphere and the mystique, I suppose, and I think that's why it sort of had such an impact on my young life.
Mate, 6.5 years to put from start to finish, and now it goes on, because now you release it and people want to talk to you about it. You'll find yourself at footy clubs talking about the book. Is it great memories now for you that you've revisited some that you've forgotten, plus you've added some new ones?
Yeah, and what's happening is I'm selling the book out of the back of my car, and I'm going to people's houses who I've never met, and they're having me in for a cup of tea, and we sit and, and we just talk for 25 minutes, probably better not let my boss know that. But, you know, I'm spending a lot of time just regurgitating and enjoying, and they've all got great memories, and they remember this, they remember that. And, you know, especially when you go to people's houses who are Woodville supporters or West Torrens supporters who, you know, they've had a merger, so they've kind of lost their identity a little bit. And like the Woodville Football Club, the chapter is called A Club's History, because that's what it is, from 64 to 90. That's the entirety of the Woodville Football Club. So they are certainly gravitating towards it and enjoying it,
Hey, Ben, it is a great
job,
book, mate. If I want to get one, I can't follow you around and find your car, mate. Where can the viewers get online? Can they give you a call?
There's a website called Australian Authors. So you can go in Australian Authors and you know, clue in there Ben Porter, it'll come up. Otherwise, Matilda's at Stirling are selling them. The Carolta Park News Agency are selling them, so they're doing a great job for me. And look, well, eventually we'll be selling them at Dylan's bookstore, I'm pretty sure of that.
Great job, mate.
Yeah. Ben Porter was our special guest. You need to get it. The golden years of footy, 10 clubs, 27 years, the golden age of SANFL. There wasn't a better time for South Australian footy. Get on it. Well done, Ben. Appreciate your time. Stay with us still. Plenty to come.
Thanks, guys.